The wolves were closing in, and Serafina could not remember how to breathe. Not because they were hunting her, but because one of them, just one, separated from the rest by shadow and distance, had looked at her with eyes that knew her name. The Whispering Woods had no mercy for those who entered unprepared. Serafina had been warned. She had been given charms, blessings, a map drawn in ink that smelled like sage and ash. She had been told to follow the northern star through the canopy, to avoid the clearings where the mist pooled like spilled milk, to never ever respond if she heard her name called by a voice she did not recognize. No one had told her what to do if her body recognized something her mind could not. The forest floor was slick beneath her boots, a mixture of moss and decayed leaves that swallowed sound. Her breath came in short, visible bursts, clouding the air in front of her face. The cold was not just temperature. It was presence. It pressed against her skin, seeped into her bones, whispered that she did not belong here, that she had crossed into a place where the rules of the kingdom did not apply. She had been walking for hours, maybe longer. Time moved differently beneath these trees, where the light never quite reached the ground and the silence was so complete it felt like drowning. Her legs ached. Her fingers were numb despite the gloves. The small leather satchel at her hip, meant to carry the remedy back to the palace, swung empty and useless against her thigh. She had not found the flower yet. The moonveil bloom, they called it. A pale, luminous blossom that only grew where ancient magic had scarred the earth, where the veil between worlds was thin enough to tear. The Alpha King was dying. That was what they had told her, though they used softer words. Weakening, fading, unbalanced. His strength was tied to the land, and the land had begun to reject him. No healer could explain it. No ritual could reverse it. Only this, a remedy born of the same magic that had woven the kingdom together centuries ago. And Serafina, the true Omega destined to stand beside him, had been the one sent to retrieve it. She had not wanted to come. The moment the council had spoken the name of the forest, something inside her had recoiled. A visceral, childlike terror that she had spent years trying to bury. Wolves. Darkness. The feeling of being hunted by something that moved faster than sight. She had been 7 years old the first time. Lost during a festival, wandering too far from the firelight. She remembered the eyes first. Golden. Unblinking. Watching her from between the trees. She remembered running, her small legs tangling in her dress, her voice too frightened to scream. She remembered the hot breath on the back of her neck, the low growl that vibrated through her chest like a second heartbeat. She had been found before anything happened, carried back to safety by guards who scolded her for wandering. But the fear had remained, curled around her ribs like a living thing. And now she was here, alone, surrounded by the very thing that had haunted her since childhood. The first howl split the silence like a blade. Serafina froze. Her heart slammed against her sternum, too fast, too hard. The sound had come from behind her. Close. Closer than anything should have been without her hearing it approach. A second howl answered. This one to her left. Then a third, distant and high, spiraling up through the canopy like a warning. They were coordinating, communicating, circling. She forced her legs to move. 1 step. 2. Her boots slipped on the wet leaves, and she caught herself against the rough bark of a tree. The texture bit into her palm, grounding her for just a moment. She could not afford to panic. Panic made prey. But she was prey. She had always been prey. Another howl. This one so close she felt it in her teeth. Serafina ran. The forest blurred around her. Branches clawed at her cloak, snagged in her hair. Her breath sawed in and out of her lungs, burning cold and sharp. She did not know where she was going. The map was useless now, crumpled somewhere in her pocket. The stars were hidden. The path had disappeared. Behind her, she heard them. Not howling anymore. Running. The rhythmic pound of paws against earth, the snap of underbrush, the low panting breaths of predators who did not need to rush because they knew she could not escape. Her foot caught on a root, and she went down hard. Pain exploded through her knee, her palms. The ground was freezing, soaking through her cloak in seconds. She scrambled to her feet, biting back a cry, and that was when she saw them. For wolves. No, 5. Emerging from the shadows like they had been sculpted from the darkness itself. Their eyes gleamed in the dim light, reflecting something that was not quite natural. Their fur was matted, streaked with mud and something darker. They moved with eerie synchrony, spreading out to block every direction. Seraphina's back hit a tree. There was nowhere left to go. Her heart was a trapped bird, frantic and stupid. Her hands shook. She tried to remember the training. The breathing exercises meant to calm an Omega's instincts, to suppress the panic that could spiral into something more dangerous. But her body would not listen. It was 7 years old again, frozen and helpless. The largest wolf stepped forward. Its lips pulled back, revealing teeth that were too white, too sharp. A growl rumbled deep in its chest, and Seraphina felt an answering pull low in her own body. Something primal. Something that did not make sense. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, there was something else. A flicker of recognition. A warmth that should not exist in a moment like this. Her breath caught. The wolf's eyes were not gold. They were gray. Storm gray. Familiar in a way that made her chest ache. And then, from somewhere beyond the circle of wolves, she felt it. A presence. Not a threat. Not safety either. Something in between. Something that made the air shift, made the wolves pause mid-step, made the entire forest hold its breath. One of the wolves turned its head, ears flicking back. Another whined, low and uncertain. The largest one held its ground, but its growl had faded to silence. Seraphina did not move. Could not move. Her body was locked in place, every instinct screaming contradictions. Run. Stay. Fight. Surrender. And then he stepped into the clearing. Not a wolf. A man. Barefoot. Shirtless despite the cold. His skin pale in the fractured moonlight, marred by scars that looked old and angry. His hair was dark, tangled, falling past his shoulders. His eyes, those same storm gray eyes, locked onto hers with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. He did not speak. Did not need to. The wolves backed away. One by one, they melted into the shadows, leaving only silence and the ghost of their presence. Seraphina's knees buckled, but she caught herself. Her pulse was still racing, her hands still shaking. She should have run. Should have taken the opportunity to flee while the wolves were gone. But she could not look away from him. He stood at the edge of the clearing, unmoving, watching her with an expression she could not name. Grief. Longing. Something that looked like pain. You should not be here. His voice was rough and used. It scraped against the silence like stone on stone. Seraphina opened her mouth, but no words came. Her throat was too tight. Her mind was a tangle of fear and confusion and something far more dangerous. Because she knew him. She did not know how. Did not know why. But every part of her body, soul, instinct recognized him. And that terrified her more than the wolves ever could. If you are already feeling the pull of this story, if something in you is stirred awake, subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart stories. Because we are only beginning. The silence between them stretched like a living thing. Seraphina could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the blood rushing through her veins in a rhythm that felt too loud, too obvious. The man, this stranger who was not a stranger, remained motionless at the edge of the clearing, his chest rising and falling with breaths that seemed carefully controlled. As if he too was fighting something beneath his skin. The cold had teeth now. It bit through her cloak, found every gap in the fabric, settled into her bones. But she could not move. Could not break whatever thread had pulled taut between them the moment their eyes met. He took a step forward, and Seraphina's body responded before her mind could catch up. She pressed harder against the tree, her fingers digging into the bark. Every instinct she had been trained to suppress roared to life. He was danger. He was unknown. He had appeared from nowhere, commanded wolves with his mere presence, and now he was moving toward her with the careful deliberation of someone approaching a wounded animal. But he stopped. 3 paces away. Close enough that she could see the scars on his chest were not random. They formed patterns, deliberate marks that looked ritualistic. Close enough that she could see his hands were shaking almost as badly as hers. Serafina. Her name left his mouth like a prayer. Like a confession. Like something he had been holding behind his teeth for so long it had cut his tongue. The sound of it broke something in her chest. She inhaled sharply, and the breath tasted like pine and cold earth and something else. Something that made her head swim. How do you know my name? He flinched. Actually flinched, as though the question had struck him physically. His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. Then, quietly, with a rawness that made her ribs ache, he spoke. I have always known your name. It was not an answer. It was a riddle wrapped in pain. Serafina's hands curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to demand clarity, wanted to run, wanted to understand why her body was leaning toward him when her mind screamed to flee. Instead, she forced herself to speak through the tremor in her voice. The wolves. You stopped them. They were not supposed to cross this boundary. His gaze flicked past her, into the darkness beyond the clearing, and something dangerous flickered across his features. Someone sent them. Someone who wants you lost. The implication settled over her like ice water. She had thought the journey dangerous because of the forest itself, because of her own fears. She had not considered that the danger might be intentional. That someone might want the Alpha King's remedy to fail. Might want him to remain weak. Why would anyone? She stopped. The answer was obvious. Power. Succession. The kingdom had been stable for decades under the Alpha King's rule, but stability bred complacency. And complacency bred ambition in those who believed they deserved more. The man, she still did not know his name, took another step closer. This time, Serafina did not retreat. Something in his expression had shifted. The grief was still there, carved into the lines around his mouth, the shadows beneath his eyes. But there was something else now. Resolve. You were looking for the moonveil bloom. It was not a question. Serafina nodded, her throat too tight for words. You will not find it on the paths they gave you. His voice dropped lower, edged with bitterness. The map they provided was designed to keep you wandering until dawn. Until it was too late. Her stomach twisted. How do you? Because I know these woods better than my own heartbeat. He turned, presenting his back to her, an act of trust that felt monumental, though she could not explain why. And because I know what it means when a true Omega is sent into the wilderness alone. The title struck her like a slap. True Omega. She had worn it like a crown and a chain for most of her life. It defined her worth, her purpose, her future. But hearing it from his lips felt different. It sounded like mourning. I can take you to the bloom, he continued, his shoulders tense beneath the scars. But we need to move now. The wolves will regroup. And next time, I may not be able to turn them away. Serafina stared at the broad plane of his back, at the way his muscles shifted beneath scarred skin, at the way his hands hung loose at his sides despite the tremor she had seen moments ago. Every logical part of her said this was insane. She did not know him, did not know his intentions. Following him deeper into the forest could be walking straight into a trap. But that pull, that inexplicable, maddening recognition, refused to release its grip on her chest. Why are you helping me? The question came out smaller than she intended. Vulnerable. He went very still. For several heartbeats, he did not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, and it carried the weight of years. Because once, a long time ago, someone should have helped you. And no one did. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she had to blink rapidly to clear it. She did not understand. Could not possibly understand what he meant. But the sincerity in his tone, the anguish threaded through every syllable, made her believe he was telling the truth as he knew it. She pushed away from the tree. Her knee throbbed where she had fallen, but she ignored it. I do not even know your name." He turned then, slowly, and the moonlight caught his face in profile. He was beautiful in a broken way. Sharp features softened by exhaustion, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, eyes that held decades of sorrow despite the fact that he could not have been more than 30. Cashin. The name fell between them like a stone into still water. "My name is Cashin." Something in Seraphina's chest lurched. The name resonated in a place she could not reach, could not examine. It felt old, familiar, like a melody she had heard in childhood but could no longer remember the words to. She opened her mouth to respond, but Cashin had already turned away, moving toward the far edge of the clearing with a grace that seemed at odds with his disheveled appearance. He moved like the wolves had, silent, efficient, perfectly attuned to the forest around him. "Stay close," he said without looking back. "And do not speak unless necessary. Sound carries differently here. It attracts things that should remain sleeping." Seraphina hesitated for only a moment. Then, against every ounce of training and caution, she followed him into the dark. The forest changed as they moved deeper. The trees grew taller, their trunks wider, their roots more gnarled and ancient. The canopy thickened until the moonlight became nothing more than scattered fragments, brief interruptions in an otherwise consuming darkness. The air grew heavier, pressing against Seraphina's skin like a living thing. She could feel it testing her, searching for weakness, for fear. Cashin moved ahead of her with absolute certainty, never once checking the path, never hesitating at the numerous forks and turns. He navigated the forest like it was an extension of himself. And perhaps it was. Perhaps he had been here so long that the boundary between man and wilderness had blurred beyond recognition. Seraphina watched his back, the way his shoulders remained tense, the way his head tilted slightly as though always listening. She noticed the way he avoided certain areas, the clearings where mist pooled, the hollows where the silence felt too complete. He was protecting her, guiding her through dangers she could not see but could feel pressing at the edges of her awareness. "How long have you been out here?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Cashin's steps faltered. Just for a moment. Then he continued forward, but his voice when he answered was rough. "Long enough to forget what it feels like to be warm." The admission cracked something open in Seraphina's chest. She thought of the palace, of her rooms with their fireplaces and thick rugs and windows that overlooked gardens designed for beauty. She thought of the life she had lived, sheltered, purposeful, comfortable in its confines. And she thought of this man, exiled to the wilderness for reasons she could not fathom, surviving alone in a place that wanted to consume him. "Why do you stay?" This time, he did stop. Turned to face her with an expression so raw it stole her breath. "Because leaving would destroy everything I am trying to protect." Before she could ask what he meant, a low rumble vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. Cashin's hand shot out, gripping her arm and pulling her against him. The contact sent a shock through her entire body, not from fear, but from something electric, something that made her skin ignite and her pulse stutter. He felt it too. She knew because his breath hitched, because his fingers tightened on her arm for just a second before he forced himself to release her. "Do not move," he whispered, his mouth close to her ear. "And do not look up." Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel his body heat radiating against her side, could smell earth and pine and something distinctly him. Above them, she heard it. The sound of massive wings cutting through air. The creak of branches bending under impossible weight. A presence that blotted out what little light remained. Cashin's arm came around her waist, steady and unyielding, holding her in place when every instinct screamed to run. His chest pressed against her back, and she could feel his heartbeat, rapid, unsteady, mirroring her own. The presence passed overhead. Slowly, deliberately, as if it knew they were there and was choosing whether or not to engage. Seraphina squeezed her eyes shut, her hands finding Cashin's arm and gripping tight. She felt him tense, felt the tremor that ran through his entire frame. But he did not move, did not let her go. He held her there, anchored her, until the sound of wings faded into the distance and the forest settled back into its oppressive quiet. When he finally released her, they both staggered apart like they had been burned. Neither of them spoke. But Serafina could still feel the imprint of his arm around her waist, could still feel the ghost of his heartbeat against her spine. And she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that something had shifted between them in those few breathless moments. Something irreversible. Cashin turned away quickly, running a hand through his tangled hair. "We are close," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "The bloom grows just beyond the next ridge." Serafina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She followed him the rest of the way in silence, her mind spinning with questions she did not know how to ask. And when they finally reached the ridge and she saw what lay below, every question vanished from her mind. The moonveil bloom grew in a hollow that looked like a wound in the earth. The ground was scorched, blackened, as though something had burned so hot and so bright that it had left a permanent scar. And in the center of that scar, impossibly, grew a single flower. It was pale as bone, luminous as starlight, its petals seeming to pulse with their own inner glow. But that was not what stole Serafina's breath. It was the shelter. Just beyond the bloom, built into the side of the hollow, was a small structure. Not a cave. Not a natural formation. A shelter. Deliberately constructed from wood and stone, weathered but intact. Someone lived here. Serafina's gaze snapped to Cashin. He stood at the edge of the ridge, his expression unreadable, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This is where you live," she whispered. He did not deny it. Did not look at her. Just stared down at the hollow like it was both sanctuary and prison. "Yes," he said finally. "This is where I have existed. For longer than you can imagine." And in that moment, Serafina understood. This was not a rescue. This was not chance. Cashin had been waiting. For her. The descent into the hollow was treacherous. The earth crumbled beneath Serafina's boots, loose and unstable, forcing her to move slowly, testing each step before committing her weight. Cashin moved ahead of her with the same unsettling grace, as though gravity held less claim on him than it did on her. He did not offer help. Did not reach back to steady her. But she noticed the way he paused whenever she slipped, the way his shoulders tensed until she found her footing again. By the time they reached the bottom, Serafina's palms were scraped raw and her knee was screaming in protest. But she did not complain. Could not. Because now that she was standing in the hollow, surrounded by the scorched earth and the unnatural glow of the moonveil bloom, she could feel it. Power. Old. Vast. Humming beneath the surface like a sleeping beast. It pressed against her skin, seeped into her lungs with every breath, called to something deep inside her that she had spent her entire life trying to ignore. Cashin watched her carefully, his storm-gray eyes tracking every micro-expression that crossed her face. "You feel it." It was not a question. Serafina wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the strange warmth radiating from the bloom. "What is this place?" "A scar," Cashin said quietly. "Left behind when the kingdom was forged. When the balance was first established." He moved closer to the flower, but did not touch it. Did not even reach for it. Magic this old does not fade. It festers. Waits. Remembers. Serafina stared at the bloom, at the way its petals seemed to breathe in rhythm with her own pulse. She should have felt triumph. She had found what she came for. The remedy that would save the Alpha King. The purpose that justified her journey into the wilderness. But all she felt was unease. Why does it grow here? She forced herself to look away from the flower, to focus on Cashin instead. In this place. Something flickered across his features. Pain. Resignation. Because I am part of the scar. The words hung in the air between them, dense with meaning she could not unravel. Serafina took a step closer, her fear momentarily forgotten in the face of her need to understand. What does that mean? Cashin turned away, moving toward the shelter. For a moment, she thought he would not answer. that he would retreat into silence and leave her with nothing but questions. But then he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of years. I was not always alone out here, Serafina. Once I had a place, a purpose, a family. He paused at the entrance to the shelter, one hand braced against the rough wood. And I gave it all up to keep the kingdom from tearing itself apart. Serafina's chest tightened. She had been raised on stories of sacrifice, of duty, of people who gave up their own happiness for the good of others. She had been told her entire life that she was one of those people. That being a true Omega meant surrendering personal desire for collective stability. But she had never met anyone who actually lived it. Not like this. Not in exile and isolation and relentless, grinding solitude. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Cashin looked at her then, really looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her feel transparent. Exposed. Because someone I loved asked me to, and I was too much of a fool to say no. The confession struck her like a blow. Serafina opened her mouth, but no words came. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments he had given her. A curse. A sacrifice. Someone he loved. Before she could formulate a response, Cashin disappeared into the shelter. Serafina stood frozen for a moment, torn between following and fleeing. Then, slowly, she crossed the threshold after him. The interior was sparse. A sleeping mat in one corner, a small fire pit that looked long unused, a few rudimentary tools. But what caught her attention were the marks on the walls. Scratches. Tallies. Words carved into the wood in a handwriting that grew progressively more erratic, more desperate, the further back they went. Hold on. Remember. Do not cross the line. Protect her. Protect them. You chose this. Over and over. Hundreds of times. A mantra carved into wood because speaking it aloud was not enough. Serafina's throat closed. She reached out, fingers trembling, and traced one of the deeper carvings. Protect her. I was trying not to forget, Cashin said from behind her. She spun to find him watching her with an expression that looked like shame. Every time I shift, I lose a little more. The wolf does not understand words, does not remember why it matters. So I carved them where I would see them when I came back. Reminders of what I was supposed to be doing. Serafina stared at him, her heart fracturing. How often do you shift? Every moon. He moved to the far corner, retrieved a worn cloth, and approached the bloom visible through the open doorway. Sometimes more if I cannot hold it back. The curse does not ask permission. A curse. He had said it so plainly, but Serafina was only now beginning to grasp what that meant. He was trapped. Not just in the forest, but in a cycle of transformation that eroded his humanity piece by piece. And he had endured it alone for years, because someone he loved had asked him to. Who cursed you? The question came out harder than she intended, edged with anger she did not fully understand. Cashin knelt beside the bloom, carefully wrapping the cloth around its base. A high priestess from a rival clan. She was dying, and she wanted to ensure her people's grievances were never forgotten. He worked with meticulous care, his hands steady despite the tremor she knew lived beneath his skin. She bound me to the wilderness, tied my fate to the kingdom's balance, made it so that my freedom would cost everyone I was trying to protect. Serafina's mind was spinning. A curse tied to the kingdom's balance. A sacrifice to protect others. And he had accepted it. Had walked into exile willingly. But why you? The words burst from her before she could stop them. Why not? She stopped. Because the answer was forming even as she asked the question. The Alpha King. His mysterious illness. The fact that Cashin spoke of sacrifice with the intimacy of someone who understood the weight of a crown. You are the Alpha King's brother, she breathed. Cashin's hands stilled on the bloom. He did not look at her. Did not confirm or deny. But the silence was answer enough. Serafina staggered back, her shoulders hitting the wall of the shelter. The Alpha King had a brother. She had heard whispers, fragments of old stories that were never quite finished. A younger prince who had vanished. Who was presumed dead or exiled for crimes no one would name. But not this. Never this. He knows, Cashin said quietly, still focused on the flower. He has always known. The curse was meant for him, but his voice cracked. I took it instead. And he let me. Because we both understood that the kingdom needed him more than it needed me. The pain in his voice was unbearable. Seraphina felt it in her own chest, sharp and visceral. She thought of the Alpha King, the man she was destined to bond with, the man whose life she was supposed to anchor. She had met him only a handful of times. He had been kind, distant, respectful in the way one might be toward a valuable object. She had never seen him grieve, had never heard him speak of loss. Does he ever? She could not finish the question. No. Cashin finally looked up, and the devastation in his eyes nearly broke her. He cannot. Acknowledging me, seeking me out, even speaking my name in certain contexts, it would trigger the curse. So he rules. And I remain here. And we both pretend the other does not exist. Seraphina pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the sob that threatened to escape. This was the cost of stability. This was what duty demanded. One man exiled, another forced to rule without his closest family. Both of them sacrificing everything for a kingdom that would never know the truth. And her, the true Omega, destined to complete a bond that had already been broken by forces neither she nor the Alpha King controlled. I should not have been sent here, she whispered. I was not supposed to find you. No, Cashin agreed, rising to his feet with a wrapped bloom cradled carefully in his hands. You are not. But you were not supposed to make it back either. The implication sent ice through her veins. What? The remedy is real. It will help him. But the people who sent you here knew the risks. Knew the wolves. Knew the forest. He moved toward her, his expression grim. If you had died out here, the bond would have been severed before it fully formed. And someone else, someone more malleable, more convenient, could have taken your place. Seraphina's mind reeled. She thought of the council members who had prepared her journey, the elders who had blessed her departure, the advisors who had drawn the useless map. One of them, or all of them, had sent her to die. Why? Her voice shook. Why would they want me gone? I have done everything they asked. I have been exactly what they needed me to be. Cashin stepped closer, and the proximity made her breath catch. Because you are not just a true Omega, Seraphina. You are the true Omega. The one the old prophecies spoke of. And you carry something inside you that terrifies them. I do not, she stopped. Because she did. She had always carried it. A warmth that lived beneath her sternum, a glow she could feel, but never touch. She had been taught to suppress it, to bury it beneath duty and restraint, and the carefully constructed role of the perfect Omega. But it was there. Always there. Waiting. What is it? She whispered. Cashin's gaze held hers, unflinching. Power, Seraphina. Real power. Not the kind that comes from a bond or a title. The kind that exists independent of anyone's permission. And that makes you dangerous to people who rely on control. The words settled over her like a shroud. She thought of her childhood, of the way the elders had watched her, of the rituals designed to calm her, to balance her, to ensure she never reached too far or burned too bright. She had thought they were protecting her. They had been containing her. I do not want power, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, they felt like a lie. Cashin's expression softened. No one ever does. Not at first. But wanting it and needing it are different things. He held out the wrapped bloom. Take this back to him. Save the Alpha King. Fulfill your purpose. Seraphina stared at the offering, her hands refusing to move. And then what? Then you bond with him. You stabilize the kingdom. And you forget you ever came here. There was finality in his tone. Resignation. And you. She hated how small her voice sounded. You just stay here. Alone. Losing yourself piece by piece until there is nothing left. Yes. The single word shattered something inside her. Seraphina's hands clenched into fists, anger rising hot and sudden in her chest. That is not fair. No, Cashin agreed. It is not. but it is necessary. Says who? The anger spilled over, burning away the fear and confusion. Who decided that your life is worth less than the kingdom's comfort? Who chose this? I did. His voice was firm, unshakable. I chose this, Seraphina. And I would choose it again. She stared at him, at this man who had given up everything, who had carved reminders into walls, so he would not forget why he was suffering, who had endured years of isolation without complaint. And she hated it. Hated the unfairness of it. Hated that she was supposed to walk away and pretend this had never happened. Hated that part of her wanted to stay. I do not even know you, she said, but it felt like another lie. Cashin's expression cracked. Just for a moment. Long enough for her to see the boy he must have been before the curse. Before the sacrifice. Before he became a ghost haunting the forest. Yes, he said softly. You do. And Seraphina realized, with a clarity that stole her breath, that he was right. She knew him. Had always known him. In dreams she could not remember. In a warmth that lived in her chest and called to something beyond the veil of memory. They had met before. Before the curse. Before the prophecy. Before fate had twisted their lives into impossible shapes. And something had made her forget. The words hung between them like smoke, impossible to grasp, but undeniable in their presence. Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing the single truth her mind was still struggling to accept. She knew him. The memory was not there, not in any form she could hold or examine, but the feeling was. It lived in her bones, in the marrow, in places language could not reach. It was the reason her body had recognized him before her mind caught up. The reason his voice felt like coming home. The reason standing in his presence hurt and healed in equal measure. I do not understand, she whispered, but even that was not quite true. She understood. She just did not want to. Cashin's jaw tightened. He turned away from her, moving toward the entrance of the shelter, the wrapped bloom still cradled in his hands. Beyond the doorway, the scorched earth seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, the moon-veil blooms glow casting strange shadows that did not quite match the objects creating them. There are things in this world older than crowns, he said quietly. Older than kingdoms. Bonds that form before fate has a chance to interfere. He paused, his shoulders rising with a breath he seemed to hold too long before releasing. You and I, we had that. Once. Before you were promised to him. Before the curse. Before everything. Seraphina's legs felt weak. She reached out, bracing herself against the rough wall of the shelter, her fingers finding one of the carved words. Remember. The irony was not lost on her. He had carved reminders to himself to remember his purpose. But what had been carved into her? What reminders had been etched into her soul so deeply that even forgetting could not erase them? What happened to us? The question came out raw, stripped of pretense. Cashin was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of grief so old it had fossilized. You were 8. I was 12. Your family had come to the palace for the lunar gathering, a week of rituals and celebrations meant to strengthen the bonds between the great houses. He set the bloom down carefully on a flat stone near the entrance, his movements deliberate, as though he needed something to do with his hands. You wandered away from the festivities. Got lost in the eastern woods. Do you remember? Seraphina closed her eyes. She remembered being afraid. Remembered darkness and the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Remembered golden eyes watching her from between the trees. The wolves, she breathed. One wolf, Cashin corrected. Me. I had shifted for the first time that week. Could not control it yet. Did not understand what was happening to my body, my instincts. He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her. I found you crying beneath an oak tree. And instead of being afraid, instead of running, you looked at me and said, you are scared too. The memory slammed into her with physical force. Not complete. Not clear. But there. A fragment of truth her mind had buried so deep she had convinced herself it was a dream. A wolf. Silver gray fur. Eyes that held too much intelligence to be purely animal. And beneath the fear, a connection. A thread that had pulled tight between them even then. "You did not hurt me," she whispered. "No. I stayed with you until the guards found you. And when you woke the next morning, you told everyone you had met a boy in the woods. A boy who promised to always find you when you were lost." His voice cracked. "They thought you had dreamed it. But I knew. And you knew. And every time our families gathered after that, we found each other. In gardens. In libraries. In spaces between the world adults paid attention to and the world children inhabited." Serafina's vision blurred. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She remembered now. Not everything. Not clearly. But enough. A boy with storm-gray eyes who listened when she spoke. Who did not treat her like a prophecy or a promise, but like a person. Who made her laugh. Who taught her the names of constellations. Who told her she was brave even when she felt small. "We were friends," she said, but the word felt insufficient. "We were more than that." Cashin's hands curled into fists at his sides. "By the time you were 13 and I was 17, the bond had begun to form. Not forced. Not arranged. Natural. The kind the old stories spoke of. The kind that terrified the council because it could not be controlled or predicted." Serafina's chest felt too tight. She remembered being 13. Remembered the year the elders had begun her training in earnest. Remembered the rituals that left her exhausted and hollow. Remembered waking one morning and feeling like something vital had been carved out of her chest. "They took it from me," she whispered. "They took you from me." "A suppression ritual," Cashin confirmed. "Performed by the High Council with your parents' blessing. They told you it was necessary. That your power needed to be balanced before it consumed you. But what they were really doing was severing the bond before it could fully form. Before it could interfere with the destiny they had already written for you." Rage ignited in Serafina's chest, hot and sudden. Her parents had known. The council had known. They had reached into her soul and ripped away something precious, something real, and convinced her it was for her own good. They had stolen her memories, her choice, her connection to the one person who had seen her as more than a vessel for prophecy. "Why did you not fight it?" The accusation came out harsher than she intended. Cashin flinched. "I tried. I went to my brother. Begged him to intervene. To refuse the arrangement." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But he had already been chosen as Alpha King. Had already accepted the weight of the realm. And he told me," he stopped, swallowed hard. "He told me that personal happiness was not worth the kingdom's stability. That you were a true Omega destined for greatness. And I was just a second son with no real purpose." Serafina's heart splintered. She thought of the Alpha King, the brother who had let Cashin take a curse meant for him, who had accepted Cashin's exile without protest. She had thought him kind, dutiful, noble in his sacrifice. But he had been sacrificing Cashin long before the curse ever touched him. "So you let them take me," she said. Not quite an accusation. Not quite forgiveness. "I had no choice. The ritual was performed whether I consented or not. And afterward," his voice broke. "Afterward, you looked at me like a stranger. Smiled politely when we passed in halls. Asked my name as though you had never known it. And I realized that fighting for something you could not remember was selfish. That holding onto a bond you did not feel anymore would only hurt you." Serafina pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold herself together. She wanted to rage. Wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. Wanted to demand answers from the people who had stolen years of her life in the name of destiny. But beneath the anger was something else. Grief. For the girl she had been. For the boy who had loved her when love was still simple. For the life they might have had if fate had been less cruel. "The curse," she said, lowering her hands. "When did it happen?" 2 years after the ritual. I was 19. Cashin moved to the entrance, gazing out at the hollow. The rival clan's high priestess, she came to the palace under the guise of negotiation. But she was dying. Had been for months. And she wanted revenge for grievances generations old. She performed the binding in the throne room, in front of the entire court. meant to curse my brother. To tie the Alpha King's life force to the wilderness, to watch him fade slowly while the kingdom fell into chaos. But you took it instead. I stepped between them, accepted the binding before it could fully latch onto him. The priestess died before she could redirect it. He was quiet for a moment, his silhouette framed against the strange glow of the bloom. My brother tried to find a way to break it, consulted every mystic, every ancient text. But the answer was always the same. The curse was tied to balance, to the stability of the realm. If I crossed certain boundaries, if I tried to reclaim my place, if I formed a bond that challenged the established order, the magic holding the kingdom together would unravel. Serafina's throat closed. What boundaries? Cashin turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. Any bond with the Omega intended for the Alpha King. The world tilted. Serafina staggered, catching herself against the doorframe. The meaning crashed over her in waves, each one more devastating than the last. They could not be near each other, could not rebuild what had been taken, could not even acknowledge what they had once meant to each other without risking the entire kingdom's collapse. The curse was not just his punishment. It was their separation made permanent. A guarantee that even if Serafina remembered, even if the bond tried to reform, pursuing it would destroy everything. That is why you disappeared, she whispered. Yes. The moment I understood the terms, I vanished into the whispering woods. Let everyone believe I was dead or mad or too ashamed to return. It was easier than watching you bond with my brother. Easier than seeing you fulfill a destiny that should have included me but never would. Serafina's tears fell freely now. She did not try to stop them. How long have you been here? 6 years. 6 years. Alone. Transforming with every moon. Carving reminders into walls because his humanity was slipping away piece by piece. All to protect a kingdom that had already taken everything from him. This is not balance, Serafina said, her voice shaking with fury. This is cruelty. This is sacrifice, Cashin countered. And it was mine to make. But not mine. The words burst from her before she could stop them. No one asked me. No one told me there was another option. They just decided my life for me and expected me to be grateful. Cashin crossed her in 3 strides, and suddenly he was close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his skin despite the cold. If you had known, would you have chosen differently? The question hung between them, dangerous and impossible. Serafina wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell him that she would have fought for him, would have refused the bond, would have torn the kingdom apart to find another way. But she did not know if that was true. She had been 13. Frightened. Desperate to please the people who told her she was special, chosen, important. Would that girl have had the courage to stand against prophecy? I do not know, she admitted. But I should have been given the choice. Something shifted in Cashin's expression. The careful control he had maintained since she arrived began to crack, revealing the longing beneath. His hand lifted, hesitated inches from her face, then fell back to his side as though the space between them had burned him. We need to leave, he said roughly. You have the bloom. The longer you stay here, the more danger you are in. From what? The wolves are gone. The forest. From me. The confession was raw. Desperate. From the bond trying to reform. From the curse recognizing what we are to each other and punishing us both for it. Serafina's breath caught. She had felt it. The strange resistance whenever they drew close. The way her chest ached when he touched her. The physical strain that seemed to come from nowhere. That was the curse. Fighting against what their souls remembered even if their minds had forgotten. What happens if she could not finish the question? If the bond completes? Cashin's jaw clenched. The kingdom falls. The magical infrastructure collapses. Every treaty, every protection, every carefully maintained balance gone. Chaos. War. Suffering on a scale we cannot imagine. Then why did you help me? The question came out anguished. Why not let the wolves take me? Let me fail? It would have been safer. Because I am selfish enough to want you alive even if I can never have you. His voice broke on the last word. Because 6 years in this forest have not been enough to kill what I feel for you. Because when I saw you in that clearing, terrified and alone, every vow I made to stay away meant nothing. Seraphina's heart fractured. She reached for him before she could think better of it, her hand finding his chest, feeling his heartbeat slam against her palm. The contact sent electricity through her entire body, and she saw him flinch, saw the pain flash across his features. But he did not pull away. "There has to be another way," she whispered. "There is not. I have looked. For 6 years, I have searched for loopholes, for alternatives, for any path that does not end in catastrophe." His hand covered hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his chest despite the obvious pain it caused him. "This is the only way. You bond with my brother. You stabilize his reign. You fulfill the prophecy. And I stay here until there is nothing left of me to remember why it hurts." "No." The word came out fierce. Certain. "No. I refuse to accept that. Seraphina, you have spent 6 years alone. 6 years carving reminders into walls because you were afraid of forgetting why you mattered. But you do matter, Cashin. Not because of the curse. Not because of what you gave up. Because you are," her voice cracked. "Because you are mine. And they had no right to take that from us." Cashin stared at her, his eyes wide, his expression caught between hope and devastation. "Even if that is true, it changes nothing. The curse was designed to delay. You said so yourself." Seraphina's mind was racing now, pieces clicking together. A safeguard meant to preserve the realm until the true balance could emerge. What if we have been looking at this wrong? What if the bond between us is not the threat? What if it is the resolution? Cashin went very still. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that prophecies are never as simple as they seem. That balance does not mean stasis. That maybe," she took a shaky breath, "maybe the Alpha King's reign was only ever meant to be temporary. A bridge to something else. And the curse was not meant to keep us apart forever. Just long enough for the right moment." The hope that flickered across Cashin's face was painful to witness. But it was quickly smothered by doubt. "You are reaching. Trying to find meaning where there is only tragedy." "Am I?" Seraphina pressed. "You took a curse meant for your brother, and it did not kill you. It just displaced you, removed you from the equation. And the moment you were gone, I was bonded to him. The perfect Omega for the perfect king. Everything stabilized. Everything made sense. But he is sick now, Cashin. The bond that was supposed to sustain him is failing." "Why?" Cashin's brow furrowed. She could see his mind working, following the thread she was spinning. The bond was never meant to be permanent. Exactly. It was a placeholder. A way to hold the kingdom together until what? But his voice had changed. The hopelessness was still there, but beneath it, something else. "Possibility. I do not know yet," Seraphina admitted. "But we are going to find out." The ground beneath them shuddered. It was subtle at first, a vibration that Seraphina felt in her bones before her mind registered it as real. But then it came again, stronger, and the scorched earth around the hollow began to crack. Fine lines spider-webbed outward from where they stood, glowing faintly with the same luminescence as the moon-veil bloom. Cashin's hand tightened on hers. "We need to leave. Now." But before either of them could move, the air itself seemed to split open. The sound was like fabric tearing, magnified 1,000 times. Seraphina clapped her hands over her ears, crying out, but it did not help. The noise was inside her head, reverberating through her skull, making her teeth ache and her vision blur. And then they appeared. Not wolves this time. Not creatures of the forest. These were human or had been once. They stepped through rifts in the air itself, their forms wrapped in ceremonial robes that looked ancient, their faces hidden behind silver masks carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Council Sentinels. Seraphina's blood ran cold. She had heard of them but never seen them. The Council's enforcers, gifted with magic meant to maintain balance and punish those who threatened it. They answered to no king, no alpha. Only to the ancient laws that predated the kingdom itself. There were 5 of them. They formed a semicircle around the hollow, blocking every exit, their presence warping the air until breathing felt like swallowing glass. One of them stepped forward. When they spoke, their voice was layered, multiple tones speaking in unison, creating a sound that was distinctly inhuman. Seraphina of House Thorn. True Omega. You have been declared in violation of sacred law. Seraphina's heart slammed against her ribs. She stepped back instinctively, her shoulders hitting Cashin's chest. She felt him go rigid behind her, felt the tremor that ran through his entire frame. What violation? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I was sent here by the council itself. To retrieve the remedy for... You were sent to retrieve the bloom and return, the sentinel interrupted. You were not authorized to make contact with the exiled one. You were not authorized to discuss forbidden history. And you were certainly not authorized to question the bonds that sustain the realm. Horror washed over Seraphina in waves. They had been watching, listening. The entire time she and Cashin had spoken, every confession, every painful truth, the sentinels had witnessed it all. She did not know, Cashin said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. He stepped around Seraphina, placing himself between her and the sentinels. She stumbled into the hollow by accident. I should not have spoken. The fault is mine. The exiled one does not speak in the presence of the council's authority, another sentinel said. Your voice was forfeit the moment you accepted the binding. You exist only as a cautionary tale. A reminder of the cost of defiance. Rage flashed across Cashin's features, but he did not respond. His hands were shaking, Seraphina noticed. Not from fear. From restraint. From the effort it was taking not to shift, not to let the wolf surge forward and tear into the people who had reduced his existence to a lesson for others. Seraphina grabbed his arm, holding him in place. If I have violated sacred law, then punish me, she said, lifting her chin. But tell me what law I have broken. I have the right to know my crime. The first sentinel tilted their head, the silver mask catching the strange light. You have questioned the bond ordained by prophecy. You have entertained alternatives to the destiny written for you before your birth. And in doing so, you have destabilized the very foundation you were meant to uphold. That is not a law, Seraphina shot back. That is obedience. There is a difference. In matters of balance, there is no difference. The sentinel's voice remained emotionless, but there was an edge to it now. A warning. The true Omega exists to stabilize the Alpha King's reign, to provide the harmony necessary for the realm to thrive. Your doubts, your questions, they create cracks in that foundation. Cracks that will widen until everything collapses. Then maybe the foundation was flawed to begin with. The words left Seraphina's mouth before she could stop them. Before she could consider the consequences. The air pressure changed. Dropped. Seraphina's ears popped, and she felt something press against her chest, an invisible force that made breathing difficult. You dare, the sentinel began. I dare to ask why a kingdom's stability requires two people to suffer in silence, Seraphina interrupted, her voice rising. I dare to question a prophecy that serves everyone except the people living it. I dare to wonder if balance built on sacrifice and suppression is really balance at all. The force pressing against her chest intensified. She gasped, staggering, but refused to fall. Behind her, she heard Cashin snarl, an inhuman sound that was more wolf than man. Stand down, exiled one of the sentinels commanded. Or we will be forced to reinforce the binding. Try it, Cashin growled. See how well your magic holds when I stop caring about the consequences. The threat hung in the air, dangerous and real. Seraphina could feel the shift in him, could sense the wolf clawing its way to the surface. If he transformed now, if he attacked the sentinels, the curse would activate. The kingdom would fall. Everything he had sacrificed for would be lost. Cashin, do not. She forced the words out despite the pressure on her chest. Please, do not. He hesitated. She felt it in the way his body trembled against hers, in the way his breathing hitched. The wolf wanted blood, wanted violence, wanted to protect her regardless of cost. But the man, The man remembered why he had accepted exile in the first place. Slowly, agonizingly, she felt him pull back, felt the shift recede, heard his breathing even out into something almost human. The sentinels seemed to relax marginally, though their stances remained threatening. "You will return to the palace," the first sentinel said, addressing Seraphina. "You will bond with the Alpha King before the next moon, and you will speak of this encounter to no one. The exiled one's existence is not your concern. His fate is not your burden. You are the true Omega. You will fulfill your purpose." Every word felt like a chain being wrapped around Seraphina's throat. She wanted to refuse, wanted to fight, wanted to burn everything down rather than accept this prescribed future. But the pressure on her chest was unbearable now. She could not breathe, could not think, could feel her vision starting to gray at the edges. "Stop," Cashin's voice cut through the haze. "You are hurting her. We are correcting her," the sentinel replied. "Pain is an effective teacher." Something in Cashin snapped. Seraphina heard it, the sharp crack of a man reaching the absolute limit of his endurance. But instead of shifting, instead of attacking, he did something worse. He knelt. The proud, exiled prince, the man who had endured 6 years of isolation without breaking, dropped to his knees in the scorched earth and bowed his head. "Please," he said, and the word was gravel and blood. "Release her. I will accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate. But let her go. She is innocent in this." The sentinels were silent. Seraphina tried to speak, tried to tell him to get up, to stop debasing himself for her sake. But she could not draw breath, could not move. "Your suffering is already determined," Exiled One, the first sentinel said. "You have no additional penalty to offer. But your submission is noted." The pressure on Seraphina's chest vanished. She collapsed forward, gasping, her hands slamming into the ground as she dragged air into her lungs. The relief was so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Cashin was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders, checking her for injury. "Breathe," he murmured. "Slowly. You are all right. Just breathe." She clung to his arms, her fingers digging into scarred flesh. "You should not have." "Hush." One of the sentinels moved closer, and Cashin immediately shifted his position, keeping himself between them and Seraphina. "The bloom," the sentinel said, extending a gloved hand. "It must be delivered to the palace before dawn. Any delay will be interpreted as further defiance." Cashin's jaw clenched, but he retrieved the wrapped flower and held it out. The sentinel took it, handling it with a reverence that felt obscene given the cruelty they had just inflicted. "The Omega will be escorted back to the palace," another sentinel announced. "You, Exiled One, will remain within the boundaries of the Hollow. Any attempt to follow, to contact, or to interfere with the true Omega's destiny will result in immediate activation of the binding's final clause." Seraphina's stomach dropped. What final clause? But the sentinels did not answer her. They were already turning, already moving toward the rifts they had arrived through. "Wait!" Seraphina scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her knee, the ache in her chest. "What happens if he breaks the boundary? What is the final clause?" One of the sentinels paused, turned to look at her with that terrible, expressionless mask. "Death," they said simply. "His transformation will become permanent. And the man you knew, the man you are trying to remember, will cease to exist entirely. Only the wolf will remain. Mindless. Feral. Lost." The words struck Seraphina like physical blows. She looked at Cashin, saw the confirmation in his eyes. He had known. All this time, he had known that the curse was not just about exile. It was about erasure. If he stepped out of line, if he fought too hard, he would lose himself completely. And he had been willing to risk it. For her. "No," Seraphina breathed. "No. There has to be." "There is nothing," the sentinel interrupted. "This is the balance you have questioned. This is the cost of defiance. Remember it, true Omega." And choose wisely. The rifts opened wider. The sentinels stepped through, the bloom cradled carefully in their hands, and reality sealed behind them like they had never existed at all. Serafina and Cashin were alone in the hollow once more. But everything had changed. The silence was suffocating. Serafina could not look at him, could not bear to see the resignation she knew would be written across his features. "You should go," Cashin said quietly. "They will be watching now. Any delay will only make things worse. I am not leaving you here." Her voice shook with barely contained fury. "You do not have a choice. There is always a choice." She whirled to face him, and the devastation in his eyes nearly broke her. "You told me that once. Do not tell me I was wrong to believe it." Cashin reached for her, then stopped himself, his hand falling back to his side. "What do you want me to say, Serafina? That there is some miraculous solution we have not found yet? That love is enough to overcome centuries of magic and prophecy? It is not. I learned that lesson 6 years ago. Then what was the point?" The question burst from her, anguished. "What was the point of helping me? Of telling me the truth? Of making me remember what we had if we are just supposed to walk away and pretend none of it matters? Because you deserve to know." His voice cracked. "Because even if we can never be together, even if this ends the way they have decreed, you deserve to know that someone saw you. Really saw you. Not as a prophecy or a tool or a destiny, but as Serafina. Just Serafina. And loved you anyway." The confession shattered what was left of her composure. Serafina closed the distance between them in 2 strides and threw her arms around his neck. The contact sent pain lancing through her entire body, the curse fighting their proximity, but she did not care. She held him as tightly as she could, felt his arms come around her waist, felt his face press into her hair. "I remember," she whispered against his shoulder. "Not everything, but enough. You found me when I was lost. You promised you always would. And I am not going to let them make a liar out of you." Cashin's grip tightened. "Serafina, I will go back to the palace," she said. "I will play their game. I will be the perfect, obedient Omega they expect. But I am not bonding with your brother. Not yet. Not until I find another way. There is no other way. Then I will make one." She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "I am a true Omega. I carry power they have spent my entire life trying to suppress. Maybe it is time I stopped letting them." For the first time since the Sentinels had appeared, hope flickered across Cashin's features. "Fragile. Uncertain. But there. If you do this, if you fight them, they will not be merciful," he warned. "I do not want mercy." Serafina's voice was steel. "I want justice. For you. For me. For everyone who has been sacrificed to maintain their version of balance." Cashin searched her face, and whatever he saw there made him release a shaky breath. "You terrify me, Serafina of House Thorn." Despite everything, she smiled. "Good. Maybe the council should be terrified too." They had perhaps an hour before the Sentinels would expect her back at the forest's edge where an escort would be waiting. An hour before she had to become the dutiful Omega again, before she had to bury the anger and the hope and the grief beneath the mask of compliance. Cashin seemed to sense her thoughts. He took her hand, ignoring the way the contact made them both flinch, and led her into the shelter. Inside, away from the open air and the watchful eyes of whatever forces monitored the hollow, the world felt smaller, more intimate. The carved words on the walls surrounded them, a testament to one man's desperate battle against forgetting. "Tell me about the bond," Serafina said, settling onto the sleeping mat. Her body ached from the Sentinel's assault, but she ignored it. "Not what they told you. What you felt. Before they took it from me." Cashin hesitated. He remained standing near the entrance, his silhouette backlit by the bloom's glow. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. That revisiting those memories would be too painful. But then he moved. Sat down across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched. Close enough that she could see every scar, every line of exhaustion etched into his features. "It started the night I found you in the woods," he said quietly. "When you looked at me at the wolf and saw past the fear to what was underneath. I felt something snap into place. Like a piece of myself I had not known was missing suddenly returned." Serafina's chest tightened. She remembered that feeling. Or thought she did. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. A certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. As we grew older, it intensified. Cashin continued. Every time we were in the same room, I could feel you. Your emotions. Your presence. It was like being attuned to a frequency no one else could hear. When you were happy, the world felt brighter. When you were sad, it was like the sun had dimmed. He paused, his gaze distant. And when you were 13 and they performed the ritual, when they severed the bond, it felt like dying. Like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my heart while it was still beating. Serafina's hands trembled. She pressed them together in her lap to still them. Why did you not tell your brother how much it hurt? I did. Cashin's voice went flat. He said that love was a luxury we could not afford. That the kingdom needed stability more than it needed our happiness. And he was not wrong, Serafina. The realm was fragile then. Border skirmishes. Internal conflicts. The prophecy about the true Omega was the only thing holding the peace together. If I had fought for you, if I had refused to let you go, the kingdom might have fractured, Serafina finished. And people would have suffered. Yes, she understood. Hated it, but understood. Cashin had been 19 when the curse struck. Old enough to know the cost of war. Old enough to carry the weight of responsibility. And kind enough, foolish enough, to believe that his suffering mattered less than the collective good. Your brother, she said carefully. Does he love me? Or am I just a tool to him? Cashin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured. He respects you. Values your role. I think he even cares for you in his way. But love? He shook his head. My brother gave up the capacity for that kind of love the day he accepted the crown. He sees everything through the lens of duty now. Even you. The honesty stung, but Serafina appreciated it. She had suspected as much. The Alpha King had always been courteous, attentive in public, generous with praise. But there had been no warmth. No connection beyond what the bond was supposed to provide. What about you? She asked. 6 years alone. Have you? She stopped, not sure how to phrase the question delicately. Have I moved on? Cashin's mouth twisted into something too bitter to be a smile. No. The curse makes it impossible. Every full moon, when I shift, the wolf searches for you. Howls for you. And when I wake up human again, the longing is worse than before. There is no moving on from a bond like ours, Serafina. Even broken, even suppressed, it endures. Serafina's breath caught. She reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. This time, the pain of contact was less immediate, as though their bodies were adjusting, learning to tolerate what the curse wanted to deny. I am afraid, she admitted, of what I might do, of the power they keep telling me I have to suppress. When the sentinels were hurting me, when I could not breathe, I felt something inside me trying to break free. Something that wanted to burn them all to ash. Cashin's fingers threaded through hers. That is your gift. Your birthright. True Omegas are not meant to be passive. The old texts, the ones the Council has buried, they describe Omegas as forces of transformation. Capable of bringing harmony, yes, but also capable of dismantling structures that have become corrupt. They never taught me that. Because they do not want you to know. A compliant Omega is useful. A powerful one is dangerous. He squeezed her hand. But Serafina, if anyone can challenge the system and survive, it is you. I have seen your strength. I saw it when you were 8 years old and refused to run from a wolf. I see it now. Tears pricked at her eyes. What if I fail? What if I fight them and lose, and the kingdom falls anyway, and your sacrifice was for nothing? Then at least you fought. Cashin lifted their joined hands, pressed a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spiraling through her entire body. At least you refused to be what they tried to make you. And that, in itself, is worth something. Serafina stared at him, at this man who had given up everything and still somehow managed to believe in her. In that moment, she made a decision. She leaned forward, slowly, giving him time to pull away, to stop her, to remind her of all the reasons this was dangerous. He did not. Their foreheads touched, and the contact was electric. Serafina closed her eyes, feeling his breath against her lips, feeling the rapid beat of his heart that matched her own. "If I kiss you," she whispered, "what happens?" "I do not know." His voice was rough, strained. "The curse prohibits completing the bond. But a kiss, that might be a gray area. Or it might be enough to trigger the consequences. So we could be risking everything." "Yes." Serafina pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "Is it worth it? One kiss, if it might be the only one we ever have." Cashin's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You are worth any risk, Serafina. You always have been." Her heart fractured and soared in the same breath. She closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that was gentle and desperate and achingly familiar all at once. The world did not end. The curse did not activate. Instead, warmth flooded through her, a golden, brilliant heat that chased away the cold of the forest, the pain of the sentinel's assault, the fear that had lived in her chest for as long as she could remember. Cashin's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and she let herself fall into the embrace. Let herself remember what it felt like to be held by someone who saw her. Really saw her. Not as a prophecy or a promise or a tool. Just as Serafina. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, both trembling, Cashin pressed his forehead to hers again. "I see you," he whispered. "All of you. The strength and the fear and the power you have not claimed yet. And I am not afraid of any of it." Serafina's tears spilled over. She had not realized how desperately she needed to hear those words. How much she had craved acceptance not for what she could do, but for who she was. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Survive. Whatever happens, whatever I do or fail to do, you survive. You hold on. You do not let the wolf consume you. Because I am going to find a way back to you. And when I do, I want you to still be here." Cashin's eyes glistened. He nodded, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "I promise. As long as you are fighting, I will keep fighting too." They stayed like that for a while longer, holding each other in the dim shelter, surrounded by carved reminders and the ghost of a bond that refused to die. Outside, the hollow waited. The forest waited. The sentinels and the council and the entire weight of prophecy waited. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They had stolen something precious. A moment of truth in a world built on lies. A connection that had survived suppression, exile, and 6 years of enforced separation. And when Serafina finally rose to leave, when she pressed one last kiss to Cashin's lips and turned toward the path that would lead her back to the palace, she carried that connection with her like a flame. A small, defiant spark of hope. That somewhere, somehow, there was a way to rewrite the ending they had been given. And she would find it. Or burn the whole system down trying. The palace felt like a tomb. Serafina had been escorted back at dawn, delivered to her chambers by silent guards who would not meet her eyes. The Moonveil Bloom had already been administered to the Alpha King, she was told. His condition was stabilizing. The bonding ceremony would proceed as planned in 3 days' time, during the new moon, when the veil between worlds was thinnest and magic flowed most freely. 3 days. Serafina stood at her window, staring out at the gardens she had walked 1,000 times, and felt like a stranger in her own life. Everything looked the same. The marble fountains. The carefully manicured hedges. The servants moving through their routines with practiced efficiency. But she had changed. Something fundamental had shifted during her time in the Whispering Woods, and she could not pretend otherwise. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the warmth that lived there. The ember of connection that had reignited when Cashin kissed her. It pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, steady and persistent, refusing to be ignored. The council had tried to sever this once before. They had reached into her soul at 13 and carved away her memories, her choice, her bond. But they had failed to destroy it completely. They had only buried it. And now it was awake again, burning brighter than ever. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Before she could respond, it opened. Her mother swept in, resplendent in ceremonial robes, her expression carefully neutral. Seraphina's stomach clenched. She had not seen her mother since before the journey, had not had to face the woman who had consented to the suppression ritual that stole years of her life. "The seamstress will be here within the hour to fit your bonding gown," her mother said without preamble. "The council has also requested your presence at tonight's gathering. They wish to review the ceremony protocols with you." Seraphina turned from the window slowly. "And if I refuse?" Her mother's expression flickered. Just for a moment. Surprise, perhaps. Or concern. "You will not refuse. This is what you were born for, Seraphina. What we have prepared you for your entire life." "Prepared me?" Seraphina's voice was flat. "Is that what you call it? Stealing my memories? Suppressing my power? Deciding my future without my consent?" Her mother went very still. "You know, it was not a question." Seraphina felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. "Did you think I would not find out? That I could bond with the Alpha King and never wonder why it felt wrong? Why I could never quite settle into the role you carved out for me? It was necessary." Her mother's voice was firm, but Seraphina caught the tremor beneath. "You were a child. You did not understand the stakes. The bond you were forming with the younger prince, it was beautiful, yes, but it was also dangerous. It would have destabilized everything the prophecy promised. So you destroyed it." Seraphina's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You let them reach into my mind and tear away the most important relationship I had ever known. And you called it love. Called it protection. It was protection." Her mother crossed the room, reaching for Seraphina's hands. Seraphina stepped back, putting space between them. The rejection clearly stung, but her mother pressed on. The kingdom was on the brink of collapse. Without the true Omega's bond to stabilize the Alpha King's reign, we would have fallen into chaos. Civil war. Famine. Suffering on a scale you cannot imagine. We made the only choice we could. "You made a choice for me," Seraphina corrected. "Without asking. Without explaining. You took away my voice and convinced yourself it was for my own good." Her mother's composure cracked. "What would you have had us do? Let you bond with a second son who had no real power? Let you throw away your destiny for a childhood infatuation?" It was not infatuation. The words came out sharp, edged with fury. "It was real. It was mine. And you had no right to take it." Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Seraphina could see her mother struggling, could see the conflict written across her features. Perhaps she had convinced herself over the years that the choice had been right, that the sacrifice had been necessary. But standing here now, faced with her daughter's anger, the certainty seemed less solid. "The bonding ceremony will proceed," her mother said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "You will fulfill your duty to the kingdom. And in time, you will understand that what we did was out of love." "Love does not erase people," Seraphina said quietly. "Love does not steal choices and call it protection. What you did, what the council did, that was not love. That was control." Her mother flinched. For a moment, Seraphina thought she might apologize, might acknowledge the harm that had been done. But instead, she simply turned and walked toward the door. "The seamstress will be here within the hour," she repeated. "Please be ready." The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Seraphina was alone again. She stood in the center of her chambers, feeling the walls close in. 3 days. In 3 days, she would be expected to stand before the entire kingdom and bond with a man she did not love. To seal herself into a destiny that had never truly been hers. To become the perfect, compliant Omega they had spent her entire life creating. Unless she found another way. The thought crystallized in her mind with startling clarity. She had told Cashin she would find a path forward, but she had not known what that meant. Not really. But standing here now, feeling the bond pulse in her chest, feeling the power the council had tried so hard to suppress stirring beneath her skin, she understood. She could not bond with the Alpha King. Not without destroying what remained of her connection to Cashin. Not without betraying the truth of who she was. Which meant she had to do the unthinkable. She had to challenge the prophecy itself. The decision terrified her. But beneath the fear was something else. Something that felt like freedom. Serafina moved to her desk, pulling out parchment and ink. She began to write, her hand steady despite the tremor in her chest. A letter to Cashin. Instructions for what she was about to do. A plea for him to trust her even if everything seemed to be falling apart. She was sealing the letter when the second knock came. This time, she did not wait for permission. The door opened, and the Alpha King himself stepped through. Serafina's breath caught. She had not seen him since before her journey, and the change was striking. He looked stronger, healthier. The moonveil bloom had worked. Color had returned to his face, and the gray pallor that had clung to him for months was gone. But his eyes held something she had never seen before. Sadness and resignation. You spoke with him, the Alpha King said quietly, closing the door behind him. Serafina's heart slammed against her ribs. She had not expected this. Had not expected him to know. To acknowledge. Yes. The Alpha King moved further into the room, his movements careful. As though approaching something fragile. The Sentinels reported your encounter. They said you violated protocol. That you questioned the bond. I did. He studied her for a long moment. And what did my brother tell you? Serafina's throat tightened. This was dangerous ground. But she was tired of lies. Tired of playing games. He told me the truth. About the bond we shared. About the suppression ritual. About the curse. The Alpha King's expression did not change, but she saw his hands clench briefly at his sides. He should not have burdened you with that knowledge. It was not a burden. It was the truth I deserved to know. Serafina lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. Did you love me? Ever? Or was I always just a means to an end? The question hung between them, brutal in its honesty. The Alpha King looked away, his jaw tight. I have never had the luxury of love, he said finally. From the moment I was chosen as heir, every relationship, every connection, it all became about duty. About what served the kingdom. He paused. I respect you, Serafina. I value what you represent. But love? He shook his head. That was never part of our arrangement. The admission should have hurt more than it did. But Serafina found herself feeling something closer to relief. At least he was being honest. Then why go through with the bonding, she asked. If you do not love me, if this is only about stability, because the kingdom needs it. His voice was firm, unyielding. The prophecy is clear. The true Omega's bond to the Alpha King ensures peace, prosperity, balance. Without it, things change, Serafina interrupted. But change is not the same as destruction. Maybe the kingdom does not need the bond as much as the council wants us to believe. Maybe there is another way. The Alpha King's expression hardened. You sound like him. Like Cashin. Always questioning. Always searching for alternatives when the path is already clear. Maybe he was right to question. Serafina's voice rose, passion bleeding through her carefully maintained composure. Maybe a system that requires two people to sacrifice their happiness, that demands one man live in exile and another rule without love, maybe that system is broken. Careful, Serafina. The warning in his tone was unmistakable. What you are suggesting borders on treason. I am suggesting that we stop pretending this is about balance when it is really about control. She stepped closer, her fear giving way to conviction. The council wants a compliant Omega. A predictable king. A kingdom that never changes, never grows, never challenges their authority. But that is not balance. That is stagnation. The Alpha King stared at her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw uncertainty flicker across his features. Even if you are right, even if the system is flawed, breaking it now would cause chaos. People would suffer. People are already suffering. Serafina's voice cracked. Your brother has lived in exile for 6 years. I have spent my entire life being shaped into something I was never meant to be. How many others have sacrificed their truth for the sake of stability? How many more will have to before someone says enough? The Alpha King was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. If you refuse the bond, if you challenge the prophecy, the council will not be merciful. They will see you as a threat. They will move to contain you. Or eliminate you. I know. And you would risk that? Risk everything? For what? A bond with my brother that may not even be possible to restore. Serafina met his gaze, unflinching. For the chance to choose my own fate. Yes, I would risk everything for that. The Alpha King studied her, and something shifted in his expression. The hardness softened. The resignation deepened. And beneath it all, she saw something that looked almost like envy. He was always braver than me, he said quietly. Cashin. He took a curse meant for me without hesitation. Walked into exile to protect the kingdom I was supposed to rule. And I let him. Because it was easier than finding another way. Because I was afraid of what change might cost. Serafina's anger wavered, replaced by something more complex. Pity, perhaps. Or understanding. The Alpha King was not a villain. He was simply a man who had been crushed beneath the weight of expectations. Who had chosen duty over desire so many times he had forgotten there was a difference. It is not too late, she said softly. You could help me. Help us. We could find a way to break the curse. To reshape the kingdom into something better. For a moment, just a moment, hope flickered across his features. But it died as quickly as it appeared, smothered by years of conditioning. The bonding ceremony will proceed as planned, he said, his voice returning to its formal tone. I suggest you prepare yourself, Serafina. What happens after, that will be your choice. But the council expects compliance. And they will not tolerate defiance. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. Without looking back, he added, for what it is worth, I am sorry. For the choice you never got to make. And for the role I played in taking it from you. Then he was gone, leaving Serafina alone with the weight of what was coming. She returned to the window, staring out at the gardens as the sun began to set. 3 days. She had 3 days to decide how far she was willing to go. How much she was willing to risk. The warmth in her chest pulsed, steady and insistent. A reminder of what she stood to lose. And what she was fighting for. Serafina closed her eyes and reached inward, toward the power the council had spent her entire life suppressing. She had always been told it was dangerous. That it needed to be contained. Controlled. But what if they were wrong? What if her power was not something to be feared, but something to be claimed? She let herself sink into the warmth, let it spread through her veins like liquid gold. And for the first time in her life, she did not try to suppress it. Did not try to make it smaller or quieter or more palatable. She let it burn. The air around her shimmered. The temperature in the room spiked. And when Serafina opened her eyes, she saw her reflection in the window glass. Her eyes were glowing. Soft at first, then brighter. A luminous silver gold that looked almost like starlight. This was what they feared. This was what they had tried to bury. And Serafina realized, with a clarity that stole her breath, that she was done being afraid of herself. The council wanted compliance? They were about to discover what happened when a true Omega decided to stop playing by their rules. The bonding ceremony was to take place in the Grand Hall, beneath the ancient constellation mosaic that had witnessed every major covenant in the kingdom's history. Hundreds of witnesses would attend. Every noble house. Every council member. The entire weight of tradition and expectation concentrated in one space. Serafina stood in the preparation chamber, draped in white silk that felt more like a shroud than a wedding gown. Her attendants moved around her, adjusting fabric, arranging her hair, speaking in hushed tones about what an honor this was. How fortunate she was. How the entire kingdom would be blessed by her union with the Alpha King. None of them met her eyes. Perhaps they sensed something had changed. Perhaps the power she had been practicing controlling, or rather, not controlling, was beginning to show. The air around her felt charged, electric. Several candles in the room had flickered out without explanation. One of the mirrors had cracked. Her attendants pretended not to notice. A knock at the door made everyone freeze. Then, the voice that followed sent ice through Serafina's veins. Leave us. The council's high elder. the woman who had overseen Seraphina's training, who had performed the suppression ritual 13 years ago, who held more power within the kingdom's magical infrastructure than anyone save the Alpha King himself. The attendants fled without question. The door closed with an ominous finality. High Elder Morgaine stepped into the light, her silver robes whispering against the floor. She was ancient, older than the current dynasty, some whispered. Her face was a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp. Calculating. You have been practicing, Morgaine said without preamble, reaching for the power we sealed away. Seraphina did not bother denying it. You had no right to seal it in the first place. We had every right. Morgaine circled her slowly, examining her like a specimen. You were a child. Untrained. Dangerous. Your power, left unchecked, could have destabilized the entire realm. So you say. But I think you were afraid of what I might do if I learned to control it myself. If I did not need you to tell me what I was capable of. Morgaine's expression did not change, but Seraphina caught the slight tightening around her eyes. A direct hit. The bonding ceremony will proceed, Morgaine said. And you will comply. The alternative is imprisonment. Or execution, if the council deems you too great a threat. Then I suppose they will have to make that choice. Seraphina turned to face her fully, and she let the power rise. Let her eyes glow with that silver gold light. Let the temperature in the room spike until Morgaine took an involuntary step back. Because I am not bonding with the Alpha King. Not today. Not ever. Morgaine's composure cracked. You foolish girl. Do you have any idea what you are risking? The bond is the only thing holding the kingdom together. Without it, the magical infrastructure will collapse. The wards protecting our borders will fail. Everything we have built will crumble. Good. The word came out fierce. Certain. Let it crumble. Let the system you built on sacrifice and suppression fall apart. Because I am not going to be its foundation anymore. Morgaine's hand shot out, and Seraphina felt the crushing pressure she had experienced with the Sentinel's return. But this time, she was ready. This time, she pushed back. The power surged through her, golden and brilliant and utterly uncontainable. It met Morgaine's attack and shattered it like glass. The High Elder staggered, shock written across her ancient features. Impossible, Morgaine breathed. The seals should have held. Your seals were always temporary. Seraphina's voice echoed strangely, layered with something older than her own consciousness. You can suppress a true Omega's power. But you cannot destroy it. And you certainly cannot contain it forever. Morgaine recovered quickly. She began chanting, her hands moving in complex patterns. Seraphina felt magic gathering, felt the weight of centuries of knowledge being brought to bear against her. But instead of fear, she felt only clarity. She was not alone. The bond, that connection to Cashin that had survived suppression and exile and 6 years of separation, flared to life in her chest. And through it, she felt him. Felt his strength. His determination. His absolute faith in her. Seraphina raised her hand, and light poured from her palm. Not wild. Not chaotic. Controlled. Purposeful. It struck Morgaine's working and unraveled it, thread by thread, until nothing remained but dissipating smoke. How Morgaine's composure finally shattered completely. You should not be able to, the training, the conditioning, the years of... You taught me to be afraid of myself, Seraphina interrupted. But you never taught me what I was actually capable of. And that was your biggest mistake. Morgaine's expression twisted into something ugly. Rage. And beneath it, fear. The council will never allow this. They will hunt you. Use every resource at their disposal to bring you down. Then let them try. Seraphina moved toward the door, her wedding gown trailing behind her like a war banner. I am done being their perfect Omega. It is time they learned what happens when they push someone too far. She left Morgaine standing in the preparation chamber, surrounded by extinguished candles and the ghost of power the council could no longer control. The grand hall was filled to capacity when Seraphina arrived. Every head turned as she entered, and she heard the collective intake of breath. She must have looked like a vision or a nightmare, depending on perspective. Her gown glowed faintly in the candlelight as though lit from within. Her eyes still held that silver gold luminescence, and the air around her shimmered with barely contained power. The Alpha King stood at the altar, his expression carefully neutral. But Seraphina saw the tension in his shoulders, the recognition in his eyes. He knew. Somehow, he knew what she was about to do. The council members lined the walls, resplendent in their ceremonial robes. Morgaine had taken her place among them, her expression murderous. The sentinels stood at strategic points throughout the hall, their silver masks gleaming. Everything was in place for the perfect ceremony, the perfect union. Seraphina walked down the aisle alone, refusing the traditional escort. Each step felt like a small rebellion, a reclamation of autonomy. She stopped halfway to the altar. The silence in the hall was absolute. Seraphina turned to face the assembled witnesses, the nobility, the council members who had spent her entire life shaping her into their image of perfection. "I will not be bonding with the Alpha King today," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. Chaos erupted. Shouts of outrage. Gasps of shock. The council members rose from their seats, magic already gathering around them. The sentinels moved, closing in from all sides. But Seraphina stood her ground. "The prophecy you have built this kingdom on is a lie," she continued, her voice rising above the din, or rather, it is incomplete. "You took the parts that served you and buried the rest. You created a system where people are tools, where bonds are transactions, where anyone who questions is exiled or erased." "Seize her," Morgaine commanded. The sentinels moved as one, their magic converging on Seraphina from multiple directions. She felt the crushing pressure, felt reality itself trying to constrain her. And she let the power answer. Light exploded from her body, brilliant and blinding. It struck the sentinels working and shattered it. Struck the walls of the grand hall and made the ancient stone tremble. Struck the constellation mosaic above and made the stars carve their blaze with actual light for the first time in centuries. The entire hall shook. Cracks spider-webbed across the floor. The candles burst into flames twice their normal height. And in the center of it all stood Seraphina, wreathed in silver gold fire, her power finally, fully unleashed. "I am not your sacrifice," she declared, and her voice was thunder. "I am not your tool. I am a true Omega, and that means I am a force of transformation, of change, of balance that comes not from suppression but from truth." "You will destroy everything," Morgaine shouted over the chaos. "The wards are failing. The kingdom will survive," a new voice cut through the tumult. Every head turned. The Alpha King had stepped down from the altar. He moved through the shaking hall with steady purpose until he stood beside Seraphina. Not touching, not claiming, simply standing with her. "She is right," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority despite the chaos. "The prophecy was never about her bonding with me. It was about a true Omega bringing transformation. We chose the interpretation that served us. That maintained our power. But we were wrong." "You cannot mean to support this madness," Morgaine hissed. The Alpha King looked at the High Elder, and for the first time since taking the crown, Seraphina saw him smile. Genuinely smile. "I have spent my entire life doing what was expected, what was safe, what maintained stability at the cost of everything else. And it has brought me nothing but emptiness." He turned to Seraphina. "If there is another way, if the kingdom can transform into something better, then I will not stand in the way." Seraphina stared at him, shocked. "You would give up your throne?" "I would give up a throne built on lies for the chance at something real." He paused. "The curse on Cashin. It was tied to my reign, to the bond between you and me. If that bond never forms, if the prophecy takes a different path, the curse might break," Seraphina finished, understanding flooding through her. Morgaine and the council members were shouting now, their voices overlapping in fury and fear. The sentinels moved again, but the Alpha King raised his hand. "Stand down," he commanded. "That is an order from your king." The sentinels hesitated. torn between ancient law and royal decree. And in that moment of hesitation, Serafina felt it. The bond, her true bond, the one with Cashin surging to life. Not suppressed. Not severed. Whole. She gasped as it snapped into place, as the connection that had been fractured and buried for 13 years finally, fully reformed. It was like breathing after years of suffocation. Like color returning to a world that had been gray. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that Cashin felt it too. In the whispering woods, in that hollow beneath the scorched earth, the curse was breaking. The grand hall shook again, but this time it was not from Serafina's power. This time, it was the kingdom itself responding. The magical infrastructure the council had built, layer upon layer of control and suppression, was unraveling. But it was not collapsing into chaos. It was transforming. Serafina could feel it. Could sense the old magic beneath the kingdom waking up. The magic that predated the council. Predated the prophecy. Ancient. Wild. True. What have you done? Morgane's voice was barely a whisper now. Horrified. What I should have done years ago, Serafina replied. I chose myself. I chose love. I chose transformation over stagnation. And the kingdom will be better for it. The light around her began to fade, settling back into her skin. The shaking stopped. The cracks in the floor sealed themselves, leaving only faint lines, scars that would remain as reminders of this moment. Serafina turned to the Alpha King. Thank you. For standing with me. For choosing truth over comfort. He nodded, and there was peace in his expression for the first time since she had known him. Go to him. To Cashin. The curse is breaking, but he will need you to complete the transformation. Serafina did not wait for permission. Did not look back at the council or the witnesses or the ruins of the ceremony that would never be. She ran. Through the grand hall. Through the palace corridors. Out into the gardens and beyond, toward the whispering woods. Toward Cashin. Toward home. The forest welcomed her this time. The branches that had clawed at her before seemed to part, creating a path. The mist that had pooled in dangerous clearings dissipated. Even the howls in the distance sounded less like threats and more like songs. Serafina ran until her lungs burned, until her legs trembled, until the palace was nothing but a distant memory behind her. The bond pulled her forward, a golden thread connecting her heart to his, growing stronger with every step. She found him in the hollow, collapsed on the scorched earth beside the shelter. For a terrible moment, she thought she was too late. That the curse had claimed him before the transformation could complete. But then she saw his chest rise and fall. Saw his fingers twitch. Saw his eyes open. They were gray. Fully gray. No trace of the wolf's gold. No hint of the fractured duality he had lived with for 6 years. Just Cashin. Whole. Human. Free. Serafina dropped to her knees beside him, her hands finding his face, his shoulders, his chest. Checking for wounds. For signs of pain. For any indication that the curse still held him. You did it, he breathed, his voice rough but wonderfully, unmistakably his. I felt the bond reform. Felt the curse shatter. Felt he stopped, his hand coming up to cover hers. Felt you choosing us over everything else. Serafina's tears fell freely, landing on his skin, on the scorched earth, on the ruins of the curse that had held him captive for so long. I could not let you stay here. Could not build a life on the foundation of your suffering. It was not balance. It was not destiny. It was just cruelty, Cashin finished. He sat up slowly, pulling her into his arms with a strength that should not have been possible after what he had endured. Dressed up as necessity. As sacrifice. As the cost of peace. They held each other in the hollow where the curse had been born and broken, surrounded by the ghost of old magic and the promise of something new. What happens now? Serafina whispered against his shoulder. The kingdom, the council, they will not just accept this. No. Cashin's arms tightened around her. They will fight. They will call you a traitor. They will try to restore the old order. But they will fail. Because the magic has already chosen. The realm has already transformed. And he pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. We will face it together. Whatever comes. However long it takes. Serafina searched his face, seeing the boy who had found her lost in the woods. The man who had endured exile without breaking. The soul that had always been meant for hers. I love you, she said. Simple. True. Unburdened by prophecy or expectation. Cashin's expression cracked open, revealing joy so profound it hurt to witness. I have loved you since you were 8 years old and told a terrified wolf boy that he was not alone. I have loved you through ritual and suppression and 6 years of believing I would never see you again. And I will love you through whatever comes next. Always. He kissed her then, and the world did not end. The kingdom did not fall. The magic did not punish them. Instead, something settled. Clicked into place. The bond between them, natural, chosen, real, anchored itself in a way that no forced prophecy ever could. And through that bond, the kingdom found a new balance. Not built on suppression or sacrifice, but on truth, on choice, on love that refused to be denied. They did not know what the future held. Whether the council would accept the transformation or fight it. Whether the realm would thrive under this new paradigm or struggle to adapt. Whether the path ahead would be easy or impossibly hard. But they knew this. They were together. They were free. And they were done living according to someone else's definition of destiny. The sun rose over the whispering woods, casting golden light across the hollow. And in that light, two souls who had been torn apart by prophecy and reunited by defiance began the work of building something new. A kingdom not held together by chains, but woven from choice. Would you have chosen her side? Would you have watched Serafina walk down that aisle and said nothing, accepting that some sacrifices are necessary? Or would you have felt that spark in your chest, the one that ignites when someone finally refuses to be what the world demands? Would you have called her brave or reckless? A savior or a destroyer? The answer matters less than the question itself. Because in asking, you acknowledge what the council tried to bury. That true balance does not come from suppression. That love is not weakness. That sometimes, the most dangerous thing a person can do is choose themselves over a system designed to consume them. Serafina chose. Cashin chose. And the kingdom transformed because of it. Not into perfection. Not into some idealized paradise where everyone lived happily without conflict or challenge. But into something more honest. More human. More real. The council did fight in the days and months that followed. Some accepted the new order. Others clung to the old ways until their power crumbled beneath them. The Alpha King stepped down from his throne, not in shame, but in recognition that his reign had always been a bridge to something else. To something better. And in the space he left, something new emerged. Not a single ruler. Not a prophecy carved in stone. But a council of voices, including two that had been silenced for far too long. The realm did not fall. It transformed. And in the heart of the whispering woods, where curses once festered and sacrifice was demanded without question, two people who had been told their love would destroy everything proved that sometimes destruction is just another word for transformation. Sometimes the world needs to burn before something better can grow. Sometimes the greatest act of balance is refusing to be diminished. The story does not end here. It never really ends. Because transformation is not a destination, it is a continuous choosing. A daily recommitment to truth over comfort. To growth over stagnation. To love over fear. Serafina and Cashin's journey continues. The kingdom's evolution continues. And somewhere, in the space between what was and what could be, new stories are being written. Stories of people who refuse to be erased. Who claim their power instead of apologizing for it. Who understand that being broken open is sometimes the only way to let the light in. If this story lit something inside you, if you felt that spark of recognition, of defiance, of hope, then you already know what comes next. You choose. You refuse the destiny that does not fit. You claim the power they told you to fear. You build something new from the ruins of what never should have been. And you remember, Love is not the thing that destroys kingdoms. Fear is. Control is. Suppression is. Love, real, chosen, defiant love is what transforms them. Subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because here, we do not tell tales of perfect people making easy choices. We tell stories of flawed souls choosing themselves, of bonds that refuse to break, of kingdoms that transform because someone finally said enough. We tell stories that burn, and in the burning, we find truth. The tale of Seraphina and Cashin lives on in the hearts of those who heard it. In the quiet moments when you question whether you are brave enough to choose yourself. In the defiant spark that ignites when someone tells you who you are supposed to be. In the bond, the real, true bond that connects your soul to the souls who see you, really see you, and love you anyway. This is what we offer at Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Not escape, but recognition. Not fantasy, but truth dressed in fur and magic and impossible choices. If you are ready for more, for stories that challenge and comfort in equal measure, then join us. Subscribe. Become part of a pack that understands. The most powerful magic is not the kind that controls. It is the kind that sets you free.